"Ma'am, there's someone here. He says he's your husband." That's how it started. Just 7 words over a crackling phone line that split my world clean in half. I remember the way the nurse's voice trembled, like she wasn't sure whether to whisper or shout. I was standing in the kitchen, halfway through stirring sugar into my tea, when the phone rang. The kettle was still hissing on the stove, and the late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the countertop with lines of gold and shadow. At first I thought she had the wrong number. My husband, Victor, was supposed to be out of town. A work trip to Atlanta, he'd said, just 3 days. He'd left that Tuesday morning, pressed a kiss to my temple, and promised he'd be back by Friday night. But it was Thursday, and the hospital was an hour away. So when the nurse on the phone said, "Ma'am, he's here, but he doesn't look well," I felt something cold slip down my spine. Not fear exactly, but that strange, heavy knowing that something in your life has just gone terribly off course. I dropped the spoon. It clattered against the tile. Where exactly is here?" I asked. "St. Mercy Hospital, emergency reception. Can you come now?" I didn't even grab my jacket. Normal life, set up before that call, things were ordinary, quiet even. Our home sat at the edge of a cul-de-sac in a sleepy Tennessee town, a single-story brick house with peeling shutters and a porch swing that squeaked when you leaned too far to the right. I'd lived there for 17 years, long enough to memorize every creak in the floorboards and every knot in the old oak tree out front. Victor and I had been married 22 years. We weren't passionate like we used to be, but we were steady. The kind of couple who finished each other's sentences, who bickered over grocery lists but still held hands in church. He worked in logistics for a shipping company. I taught middle school English. Our daughter, Lily, was 20 in her second year of college, studying architecture 3 states away. She called once a week, usually on Sundays, to tell me about projects and professors and the boy she wasn't dating, which meant she absolutely was. Victor had started traveling more lately. He said promotions came with responsibility, and I believed him, or at least I wanted to. He'd always been ambitious, the kind of man who ironed his shirts the night before and kept his car spotless inside and out. He was predictable in that way. Dependable. That's why the call didn't make sense. When I reached the hospital, I found him in the waiting area. But something was off, so off I almost didn't recognize him. His usually neat hair was mussed, his eyes bloodshot. He was slumped in a chair, staring at the floor, hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. "Victor?" I said softly. He looked up, startled, and for a moment there was something in his eyes I couldn't name. Not surprise, not guilt. Something deeper, something hollow. "Eleanor," he said. "Just my name, nothing else." The nurse came over and asked if I was his wife. I nodded, and she gave me a clipboard to sign. I kept my eyes on the paper because if I looked at him too long, I'd start to ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Once the nurse left, I sat beside him. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated, then car trouble, but he wasn't making sense. He hadn't been in an accident, no bruises, no bandages. The nurse said he'd come in asking for help because he was feeling dizzy and confused. They'd checked his vitals, all fine. I wanted to believe it was exhaustion, maybe stress, maybe too many miles between cities and too few hours of sleep. But there was that tone in his voice, quiet, cautious, rehearsed, like he was playing a role and forgetting the lines halfway through. He didn't want to stay for observation. After an hour, he said he was fine, that he just needed to rest at home. I drove him back, and we didn't talk much. The silence in the car felt heavy, like the air itself was watching us. When we got inside, he went straight to the shower. I waited at the kitchen table, staring at the condensation on my untouched glass of water, until I heard the bathroom door click shut. That's when I saw it, a folded slip of paper sticking out of his jacket pocket. At first I thought it was a receipt, but it wasn't. It was a hotel bill, from a place in Atlanta. Only it wasn't for 3 nights like he said, it was for 7, and the check-in date was 5 days before he'd even told me about the trip. That night, he ate quietly. Too quietly. He didn't look at me much. And when he did, his eyes darted away too quickly, like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I didn't ask about the hotel bill. Not yet. Instead, I said, "You sure you're all right?" He nodded, just tired. After dinner, he fell asleep on the couch. I watched him from across the room, the flickering TV light washing his face in pale blue. And for the first time in years, I really looked at him, at the faint worry lines, the thinning hair, the way his chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm. It's strange how you can live beside someone for decades and still feel like a stranger in your own marriage. Later, when I went to bed, I found his phone on the nightstand. It buzzed once, a soft vibration in the dark. The screen lit up. A name appeared. Just 3 letters M. Made it home yet? No heart emoji, no nickname, just that. Casual, confident, almost too normal to mean anything. I stared at the glow of the phone screen until it dimmed to black. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I knew better than to look, but something in me, the same part that saves old grocery receipts and rereads text messages twice, needed to know. I picked up the phone. His passcode was the same as it had always been, Lily's birthday. He hadn't changed it. That gave me a flicker of hope. People who hide things usually change. Passwords, don't they? When it unlocked, I told myself I'd only check that one message, just to calm my mind, just to be sure. But when I opened his messages, M wasn't a full name, it was just an initial, and the thread between them wasn't new. It went back months. The first one I read was from last week. "You forgot your charger again, I'll keep it here." And his reply, "Thanks, love. I'll grab it when I get back." I felt my stomach tighten. Oh, love. Victor wasn't the kind of man who used endearments easily. Even with me, he'd say sweetheart maybe twice a year. I scrolled farther. The more I read, the less the words made sense. Not because they weren't clear, but because I couldn't believe they were coming from him. The man who used to read bedtime stories to our daughter. The man who carried me to the car when I broke my ankle in the driveway. And yet here he was, talking about dinner plans and hotel rooms with someone named M. I put the phone down. My hands were trembling. I felt sick. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror showed a woman who looked older than she had that morning. Eyes red, mouth drawn tight. "Don't jump to conclusions," I whispered to myself. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The next morning, I pretended nothing had happened. I made breakfast like usual. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Victor came into the kitchen in a crisp white shirt already buttoned up, like the night before hadn't existed. He kissed my cheek, muttered, "Morning," and poured himself coffee. I watched him carefully. He didn't mention the hospital. He didn't mention Atlanta. He just said, "I've got a meeting in town today, might be home late." I nodded. "Okay, drive safe." I waited until his car pulled out of the driveway, then sat at the table staring at the half-empty mug he'd left behind. His lip print clung to the rim, a faint smudge. That tiny mark felt more like evidence than affection. That day at school, I couldn't focus. My students were reading The Gift of the Magi, and I kept tripping over my own words. The irony didn't escape me. Love and sacrifice. What a cruel combination. By the time the last bell rang, I had already decided. I needed to know who M was. Not for revenge, not even out of anger, just clarity. Because uncertainty, I was learning, can hollow you out more than any truth ever could. That evening, I waited for him to shower again. He always did after work. The moment the water started running, I slipped back into his phone. I opened his email this time. There, buried under a folder labeled Work Trips, was an itinerary. Not for Atlanta, for Savannah. Same dates, same hotel chain. But the reservation was for 2, and the guest name under additional occupant was Emily Carter. Emily. M. Something inside me went quiet, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. I didn't cry right away. It wasn't sadness that came first. It was disbelief. That heavy, dreamlike feeling that you've stepped into someone else's story by mistake. The shower turned off. I hurriedly put the phone back where I'd found it and tried to calm my breathing. When he came out, towel slung around his neck, I was sitting up in bed with a book open, pretending to read. He smiled faintly. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded strange, too even. He climbed into bed beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. The scent of his aftershave filled the room, cedar wood and something citrusy. I used to love that smell. Now it made me nauseous. When he turned off the lamp, I lay there in the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, steady, peaceful, like a man with nothing to hide. I lay awake until nearly 3, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator drifted down the hall. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once, twice, then went quiet. Again, and in that silence, I made a decision. If there was another woman, if my husband had built an entire hidden life just a few hours down the interstate, I wasn't going to confront him in anger. I was going to find out the truth and my way. The following weekend, Victor said he had another short trip. Just overnight, he said he'd be back by Sunday evening. I smiled, kissed him goodbye, and told him to drive safe. Then, an hour after his car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my keys. I drove to the hotel from that email, the one in Savannah. It was a 3-hour drive. I told myself I just wanted to see it to know if it was real. Halfway there, the clouds broke open. Rain streaked the windshield in slanted sheets, the wipers barely keeping up. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. By the time I pulled into the hotel parking lot, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I parked near the side entrance, turned off the engine, and sat there for a full 5 minutes, staring at the building. It was just a normal hotel, white stucco walls, rows of windows, the faint hum of air conditioning units. Ordinary, utterly ordinary. Then, through the sliding glass doors, I saw him. Victor. He was standing in the lobby talking to a woman. She was laughing, touching his arm lightly as she spoke. And that's when the nurse's voice from that first night came back to me. "Greater than ma'am, there's someone here. He says he's your husband." Because in that moment, looking through the rain-streaked glass, I realized she hadn't been wrong. There was someone there. I just didn't know that man anymore. I don't remember opening the car door. I just remember the rain hitting me, hard, cold, and without mercy. It soaked through my jacket in seconds, but I didn't care. The hotel entrance was a blur of reflections on wet pavement, glass doors sliding open as I walked in. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and new carpet. My shoes squeaked with each step. Victor hadn't seen me yet. He was still talking to her. The woman I now knew must be Emily. She was younger than I expected. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Pretty, but not the kind of beauty that intimidates. Her hair was the color of wheat after rain, and she wore a simple navy dress that clung just enough to look deliberate. They were standing close, too close. Victor leaned in to say something and she laughed. That soft kind of laugh people use when they're comfortable, when they've already crossed too many lines to pretend otherwise. Something inside me snapped, but not loudly. It was more like a thread giving way, quietly, cleanly, as if it had been waiting for that moment. I walked straight toward them. "Victor." He froze. The name seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Emily's laughter faded mid-breath. She turned, her smile dissolving into confusion. He stared at me, pale as I'd ever seen him. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" The words came out tight, strangled. "I might ask you the same thing." For a moment no one spoke. The rain thudded against the glass doors behind me, a steady percussion. Somewhere a concierge coughed softly, pretending not to watch. Emily was the first to move. She stepped back, glancing between us. I think I should go." But I held her gaze. "No, stay." Her eyes flickered, guilt, surprise, something uncertain. She looked at Victor as if waiting for him to fix it, to make this scene disappear. But he didn't. He couldn't. He sighed, ran a hand through his damp hair. "Eleanor, please, let's not do this here." I folded my arms. "Then where? In Atlanta? Savannah? Or whatever city you pretend to be in this week?" He winced. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. That line, so predictable it could have been rehearsed. Then tell me, Victor, what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like my husband spending weekends in hotels with another woman. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't know? That cut through the air like a blade. Victor turned to her sharply. Emily, but it was too late, she didn't know, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the words. So this isn't some misunderstanding. You've been lying to both of us. For the first time I saw something shift in Emily's face. Not arrogance, not shame, but devastation. She stepped back, as if the floor itself had tilted. Victor, she said quietly, you told me you were separated. The silence that followed was unbearable. Separated. The word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I wanted to speak, to shout, but I couldn't. I just stared at him, waiting for the truth to finally crawl out of his mouth. He rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath. Then softly, I was going to tell you. I blinked. Which one of us? He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. I turned toward the door, heart pounding, vision blurring, but before I reached it, Emily called out, her voice shaking. Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor, please, I swear I didn't know. He said you'd already filed. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Then I guess we both believed lies, didn't we? And with that, I walked out into the rain. I drove for 2 hours before I realized I had no idea where I was going. The wipers squealed across the windshield, the rhythmic thwack almost hypnotic. I pulled into a rest stop and just sat there, the dashboard clock glowing faintly in the dark. It was nearly midnight. That's when the tears finally came, silent at first, then heavy, uncontrollable. They weren't just tears for betrayal, they were for every moment I hadn't seen it coming, for every dinner I'd cooked, every waiting light I'd left on, every I love you that now felt like a cruel imitation of itself. I thought about Lily, how she'd always said her father was her hero. I couldn't bear the thought of shattering that image. Not yet. When I finally got home, the house felt different. Too still, too honest. I went straight to our bedroom, opened his closet, and just stared. The sight of his clothes, the neatly ironed shirts, the familiar smell of detergent and aftershave, made me realize how long I'd been living in an illusion. I sat on the floor and leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly, the wood cold against my back. There was a knock at the door around 2 a.m. It was him. I didn't answer. He called my name through the door, his voice low, pleading. Eleanor, please, I need to explain. But I stayed silent. He kept talking, words muffled by the rain and the wood between us. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you after Lily's graduation. I didn't want to hurt you. I almost laughed again, didn't want to hurt me, as if that decision had ever been his to make. After a few minutes he stopped. I heard his footsteps fade, then the sound of his car starting. When the silence returned, it felt enormous. For the next 2 days, I went through motions: work, dishes, laundry, the little tasks that keep you from falling apart completely. But everything felt muted, like I was living half a step behind my own life. Then on the 3rd morning, I got another call, not from Victor, not from Emily, from the hospital. A nurse's voice, calm but urgent, Mrs. Hayes. We have a patient here listed as your emergency contact. He was brought in early this morning after a minor accident. He asked for you. My heart sank. For a moment I thought of ignoring it, but some old instinct, maybe love, maybe obligation, made me grab my keys. When I arrived, Victor was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, his arm in a sling, face pale but intact. He looked up as I entered. You came. I'm not cruel, I said quietly. He smiled faintly. No, you never were. There was a long pause. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Finally, I asked, why her, Victor? He stared at his hands. I don't know. She made me feel seen. Again. Like I wasn't just invisible. The honesty in his tone hurt more than the lie ever had. And me? I asked. Did you ever think what it'd do to me? He looked up, eyes rimmed red. Every day. That's when I realized, guilt doesn't undo betrayal. It just lingers beside it, holding its hand. I stood up. You made your choice, now I'll make mine. And I walked out before he could stop me. When I got home from the hospital that day, the house felt heavier than ever, not empty but swollen with silence. The kind that hums in the corners, reminding you that once, laughter used to live there. I sat at the kitchen table where everything had started, the same table where I'd stirred sugar into tea the morning the first call came. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window above the sink, superimposed against the gray November sky. I didn't cry this time. I was too tired for that. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was peace. And peace, I'd come to understand, doesn't come from screaming or throwing things. It comes from reclaiming your own quiet. So, that night, I started making lists. One for the bank, one for the utilities, one for the lawyer I'd need to call on Monday. I packed slowly, carefully. Each folded shirt, each book slipped into a box, felt like reclaiming a small part of myself I hadn't realized I'd given away. The next morning, I called Lily. "Mom?" she said, sleepy but cheerful. "Is everything okay?" Her breath hitched, that same little sound she used to make as a child before she started crying. "Do you still love him?" That question landed deep in my chest. "I'll always care about him," I said truthfully. "But love doesn't always survive the way we think it will." She didn't speak for a moment, then quietly, "I love you, Mom." That was enough to steady me. By the time Victor came home that evening, half the living room was lined with boxes. He stood in the doorway, damp from the drizzle outside, staring at the cardboard stacks. "What's all this? I'm moving out for a while," he blinked. "Eleanor, please, don't do this. Let's talk." "We've done enough talking, Victor, 22 years of it. I just didn't realize half of those conversations were happening while you were living another life." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice cracking slightly. I ended it with her. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You ended it, or she did?" His silence told me the answer. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw a man I pitied more than I loved. "You know what's sad?" I said. "You could have come to me. You could have said you were lonely. I would have listened. We might have fixed it. But instead, you decided I was easier to lie to." He sat down at the table, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "I don't know why I did it." I folded my arms. "Because you wanted to feel important again. Because she saw you without knowing your history. But that kind of attention fades, Victor. And when it does, all that's left is guilt." He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes wet. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall, marking time that could never be rewound. Finally, I stood up. "The lawyer's appointment is on Tuesday. I'll handle the paperwork." He didn't try to stop me this time. That weekend, I moved into a small rental cottage just outside town. It wasn't much. One bedroom, a porch that creaked, a view of the river through the back window. But it was mine. I remember the first night I slept there. I made chamomile tea, sat by the window, and listened to the water moving slow and steady under the moonlight. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Peace doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it just arrives quietly when you stop chasing explanations. Still, there were moments of weakness. Mornings when I reached for 2 coffee cups before remembering there was only me now. Nights when I caught myself wondering what he was doing, if he'd learned anything from the wreckage he'd caused. I didn't call him, but I didn't block him either. I wanted to see who he became when there was no one left to lie to. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my door. It was just after sunset. I heard the crunch of gravel outside, then the slow knock, hesitant, almost ashamed. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a manila envelope. "I brought these," he said quietly. "The documents you'll need for the house transfer. I'm signing it over to you." I frowned. "Why?" "Because you built that home, every corner of it. You deserve to keep it." His voice was sincere, and for a fleeting moment I remembered the man he used to be. The one who built Lily a treehouse one summer and painted our kitchen yellow because he said it made mornings brighter. But I didn't let nostalgia fool me again. "Thank you," I said simply, taking the envelope. He looked past me into the house, small, cozy, lit by one lamp and the scent of lavender candles. "You seem okay. I'm learning to be." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "I miss you, I know." He waited for something more, forgiveness maybe, a flicker of hope. But I didn't offer it. Forgiveness isn't a gift you hand out, it's something you earn, piece by piece, over time. When he turned to leave, he paused. "Eleanor, would you ever consider—" "No," I said gently, before he could finish. "Not again. But I hope you find a way to forgive yourself," and I closed the door. Behind it, I leaned against the wood, breathing deeply. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since before the affair. I wrote not about pain, but about rediscovery, about how betrayal can break you open just enough to let new light in. I wrote, sometimes the phone call that shatters your world is the same one that sets you free. And as I looked out the window, the river gleaming under the moon, I realized I wasn't just moving on. I was coming home to myself. Small towns have long memories and fast mouths. By the end of November, everyone knew. They didn't know every detail, of course, just enough. The whispers traveled faster than the wind that shook the oak trees lining Main Street, first through the grocery store, then church, then the little diner where everyone stopped for coffee before work. It wasn't my doing. I hadn't told anyone. But truth, like smoke, finds its way out through the smallest cracks. The story began as rumor, and I heard Victor and Eleanor split. And then it twisted, "Did you know he was seeing someone from his office?" By week's end, it had turned into a spectacle. People lowering their voices when I walked into the post office, eyes flicking with curiosity and pity. I held my head high. See, pity is something you can choose to accept or return unopened. I returned it. When Mrs. Gardner from church tried to subtly ask how I was holding up, I smiled and said, "I'm doing fine, thank you." The truth has a funny way of setting things right. That shut down the whispers. Mostly. But Victor didn't fare so well. He kept his job, but word spread through his office faster than it had through town. Emily, it turned out, had quietly resigned. Some said she'd moved to another state, others said she'd taken time off for family reasons. I didn't care which was true. When I ran into one of Victor's colleagues at the grocery store, he shook his head and said, "He's not the same, Eleanor. Comes in late, doesn't talk to anyone. It's like someone turned off the lights inside him." I didn't know what to say to that, because I hadn't turned off the lights. He had. The next Sunday, I went back to church for the first time since everything happened. I half expected to feel small, exposed, but the moment I stepped into that old sanctuary, with its creaky pews and scent of worn hymnals and wood polish, something in me eased. Pastor Raymond looked surprised to see me. "Sister Hayes," he said warmly, "it's good to have you back." "Just Eleanor now," I said gently. He nodded with understanding. "Then welcome home, Eleanor." During the sermon, he spoke about truth, not the kind that lives in gossip or judgment, but the kind that demands courage, the kind that sometimes costs us everything. I don't know if he tailored it for me, but it felt like he did. Afterward, a few women came up to me, offering hugs and soft words. "You're strong," one said, "stronger than most." I didn't feel strong, but I realized that surviving quietly with grace was its own form of strength. 2 weeks later, the annual town charity gala took place, the same event Victor and I had attended together every year for over a decade. I hadn't planned to go, but then I thought, why should I hide? So I went, alone. I wore a simple navy dress, not expensive, but it made me feel calm. I pinned my hair back, put on my mother's pearl earrings, and walked into that ballroom as if my heart had never been broken. People stared, of course. They always do when they're trying to measure how much of you survived. Halfway through the evening, I saw him, Victor, standing near the back, drink in hand, looking older than I remembered. His tie was slightly crooked, his expression uncertain. When his eyes met mine, something flickered there. Guilt, maybe gratitude that I hadn't made a scene. He approached slowly, as if testing whether I'd turn away. "Eleanor," he said, voice soft. "Victor." He cleared his throat. You look, well, I am. A pause. I heard you moved near the river. Yes, peaceful there. He nodded. I'm glad. That's when a few of his co-workers walked by. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, gave me a respectful nod before turning to Victor. Evening, Hayes, he said, then hesitated, glancing at me again. Good to see you, ma'am. The look he gave Victor afterward said enough. Word had spread, and whatever respect my husband once carried in that circle had begun to fray. I didn't feel vindicated, just done. Take care of yourself, Victor, I said. We both have some rebuilding to do. He opened his mouth maybe to apologize again, but I was already walking away. That night, as I drove back along the river road, the moonlight spilled over the water in a long silver ribbon. The radio was low, some old Patsy Cline song humming in the background. I thought about how much had changed in a matter of months. How one phone call had cracked open a marriage, exposed the fault lines I'd been pretending weren't there. But I also thought about the strange beauty of it. The way pain, when faced honestly, becomes a kind of teacher. I passed the turnoff that led back toward our old house, and for a second, I almost took it. Curiosity, maybe. But then I kept driving. Because sometimes the hardest thing in the world isn't letting go. It's deciding you deserve to. The next morning, I got a letter. Not a text, not an email. A letter, written in Victor's familiar hand. It said simply, Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that losing you taught me the difference between comfort and love. Comfort is what I chased. Love is what I destroyed. Victor. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer, not to reread, just to keep a small monument to the life we'd had and the lesson it left behind. Because sometimes, the truest justice isn't public shame or revenge. It's the quiet dignity of moving on without bitterness, of letting the truth speak for itself. And in a town that never stopped talking, I learned that silence can be the loudest answer of all. Winter came slowly that year, a long sigh of cold mornings and pale sunlight that lingered just beyond the window panes. The river behind my little cottage froze in thin sheets, cracking softly at dawn like glass waking from a dream. By then, the storm inside me had quieted. Not gone entirely. Heartbreak never disappears, it just learns how to sit beside you without taking over the room. Most mornings I woke early, made coffee, fed the stray cat that had decided my porch was home, and listened to the world wake up. The faint hum of distant cars, the rustle of bare branches. Small sounds, ordinary ones, but they carried a peace I hadn't known in years. I started teaching again, part-time this time. My students were a new batch of 7th graders, bright-eyed, messy, and brutally honest in the way only children can be. One afternoon, while they were writing essays about what home means, a boy raised his hand and asked, Mrs. Hayes, do you live alone? For a second, I froze. Then I smiled. Yes, I said, but I'm never lonely. He nodded thoughtfully, as if that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. Healing, I've learned, doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in tiny moments. The first time you laugh again without feeling guilty. The first night you sleep through till morning. The first time someone mentions his name and it doesn't feel like a wound reopening. A month after the letter arrived, I finally gathered the courage to go through our old photo albums. They'd been sitting in a box by my bed, unopened since the day I moved. The first page was our wedding day. Victor in his gray suit, smiling like a man who believed love could outrun time. Me in my lace dress, eyes full of the kind of hope only the young carry. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because even though the ending had been painful, not everything about those years was a lie. There were real moments. Lily's first steps, our road trips, late-night talks on the porch swing. I realized I didn't have to erase them to move forward. I just had to stop letting them anchor me. So I kept a few pictures, not as relics but as reminders that love, even when it breaks, still matters. Spring came early that year. The first bloom on the cherry tree near the porch felt like a small victory, a sign that the world, despite everything, keeps finding ways to begin again. One evening, I got a call from Lily. Her voice was lighter than I'd heard in months. Mom, I'm coming home this weekend, she said, just for a few days. She arrived late Friday afternoon, carrying a suitcase and the smell of city rain. When she saw me, she dropped everything and hugged me tight. For a long time, neither of us spoke. At dinner, over roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, she finally asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about that carefully before answering. "I miss who I believed he was," I said, "but I don't miss who he became." She nodded slowly. "I saw him last month. He asked about you." "Oh?" She hesitated. "He said you looked happier now. I think that hurts him more than anything else." I sighed. Maybe it should. We didn't talk about him again that night. Instead, we played cards like we used to, laughing over burnt cookies and spilled tea. For the first time, I saw my daughter not as a child needing protection, but as a woman who had watched her mother fall apart and rebuild, and learned something from it. Before bed, she hugged me again and said, "You know, Mom, I used to think strength meant never breaking, but you've shown me it's the opposite." That night, I cried quietly, not out of pain but gratitude. By summer, the cottage no longer felt temporary. I painted the walls a soft cream, hung wind chimes on the porch, and planted herbs by the kitchen window. The cat, I'd named her Junie, followed me everywhere, tail high like a flag of ownership. Life found a rhythm again. A smaller one, yes, but an honest one. Every now and then, I'd see Victor in town, at the hardware store, or walking to his car after work. We'd nod politely, sometimes exchange a quiet hello. There was no hostility, no longing, just a shared understanding that some things end and that's okay. He looked diminished, but calmer. I hoped he'd found his own version of peace, even if it had come the hard way. One afternoon, as I sat by the river reading, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A pause, then a familiar voice. "Mrs. Hayes? It's Emily." For a moment I didn't breathe. "I hope you don't mind me calling," she said. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly. I didn't know, and if I could undo it, I would." Her voice shook, not from fear, but remorse. "I believe you," I said simply. She exhaled, a sound of quiet relief. "Thank you. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I let myself believe what I wanted instead of what was true." "That's a good start," I said softly. "We all do that, Emily. We believe the version of a story that hurts the least." Silence hung between us for a moment, then she whispered, "You're kinder than I deserve." "No," I said, looking at the sunlight rippling over the river. "I'm just tired of carrying anger. It's too heavy to take into the next chapter." We said goodbye, and when I hung up, I felt lighter. Later that evening, as the sky turned gold over the water, I thought about that nurse's voice again. "And ma'am, there's someone here. He says he's your husband." And back then it had sounded like a warning. Now I understood it differently. Maybe it had been a message. The universe's way of telling me that who I thought I knew wasn't who was standing beside me anymore. And that it was time to find myself instead. And I had. I wasn't the same woman who once clung to silence for the sake of keeping peace. I was quieter now, yes, but that quiet came from knowing exactly who I was and what I deserved. I've walked a long road since that day, the day the phone rang, and a voice I trusted told me something I never imagined I'd hear. "Ma'am, there's someone here. He says he's your husband." For a moment the world stopped, and for months after it spun faster than I could keep up with. But now, sitting by the river in the quiet evening, I understand something I couldn't back then. Life doesn't break us unless we let it. It bends us, yes. It tests us, shakes us to our core. But it also teaches us how to stand again. I don't pretend that betrayal is easy to overcome. I don't pretend that heartbreak fades overnight. But I've learned that there is power in truth, dignity in letting go, and freedom in choosing peace over anger. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't forgiving others. It's forgiving yourself for expecting perfection, for trusting someone blindly, for believing that love should protect you from pain. Once you forgive yourself, the rest falls into place. I keep a small photo on my mantle, not of what I lost, but of what remains: my daughter, my little cottage, the river glinting in the morning sun, Junie perched on the windowsill. These are my treasures now. They remind me that even after the storm, life continues, and it can still be beautiful. So I ask you, whoever you are listening, when the people we trust falter, when the ones we love make choices that hurt, how do we respond? Do we let bitterness grow, or do we find the courage to rebuild? I found mine. And I hope, in some small way, hearing my story helps you find yours too. If my story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more voices, more truths, and more stories about life, love, and learning to stand tall again. Would you have had the courage to walk away, even when the world was watching? Tell me in the comments.